Welcome to the Brain Gain Youngstown Leadership Series podcast. Each week, we'll learn from leaders who are driving change and making an impact. Now here's your host, the CEO of the Youngstown Publishing Company, Jeff Leo Herrmann.
So have you heard the phrase, it takes courage to be vulnerable? That's true, and we certainly have a courageous person here on the podcast today. I am thrilled to introduce Rhonte Davis. He is the Executive Director of the Hope Centers for Cancer Care. Grew up in Texas. He's newer to the Mahoning Valley. We're thrilled to have him here today. But he, long career in sports, great perspectives on mentorships. Really enjoy the conversation with him around a perspective that someone from Texas has when entering the community here in the Mahoning Valley. And especially, it's probably going to be a good problem we're going to have here over the next couple of years. Lots of new individuals coming to our community and what we can do as existing community members to welcome them and to help not only new community members integrate, but also the role of mentorship programs in helping our kids capture their career opportunity with them. So thanks so much for joining us today. Here is Rhonte Davis.
I got what it takes.
Rhonte, so thanks so much for joining us today. The first question we ask when we jump in is, what did you want to do as a child? What did you aspire to do when you were growing up?
I had two goals, to be honest with you. I love basketball. So as a kid, love sports. Growing up in Texas, you play everything. And so I thought possibly, professional career basketball. But then I've always been connected with business. I had a lot of family members that were entrepreneurs, and so I've always been connected at business. So owning some type of business. So I would say between the two, I was able to accomplish at least one.
What type of business was family involved in?
So father was actually a bishop, and so a nonprofit. And so I learned a lot about 501c3s and nonprofit. Being able to support local communities and community activism, and not from a standpoint from a political, whether you're Democrat, Republican, liberal, but it's more so, or conservative, it's more so from a perspective of how do we provide resources, jobs within the local community? How do we make sure that there's great resources that's available for the elderly, right? Mm-hmm. How do we make sure, I always say the simplest things is, how can we make sure there's a roof over someone's head? How can we make sure that they have means to be able to provide for their family, which is jobs, and then being able to make sure that they can eat. And so you take care of those basic needs, you typically take care of your community. And so learning from my father and grandfather and mother, it really taught me a lot about business and building relationships in your community. And so that's always been ingrained in who I am. And so far, hopefully, I think it's been beneficial all these years later that I really know the importance of our communities.
Right. So you grew up in Texas and now you're in the Mahoning Valley. What's that transition been like for you?
Very unique, actually. And so I grew up in Dallas, Texas, lived in Las Cruces, New Mexico, sort of my undergrad, and then eventually transitioned back to Dallas, Texas. And so, started my career in multiple different industries, did some consulting, but then eventually transitioned to within U.S. Oncology. I was in Dallas within a practice there, one of the larger practices, transitioned to Portland, Oregon, actually, and was there for a couple of years with a practice within U.S. Oncology called Compass Oncology, and then transitioned to the Hope Center for Cancer Care. The Hope Center for Cancer Care has been within the community since 2007, physician-owned, local practice, locally owned. Independent physicians. We're able to serve in oncology and hematology patients within the area. And so these shareholders wanted me to come in and be able to just help them go through some growing pains, which a lot of businesses go through, and helping that transition. And so since coming in community, I really enjoyed it. And you'll hear me talk a lot about sports because I do love sports. So before I came here, I saw the ESPN documentary 30 for 30 Youngstown Boys. So it's actually interesting now living in the area. And so it's kind of one of those things like, aha, I remember this. And so I've seen it a couple times, 2 times before I was in the area. Now I watched it about 6 months ago again. And it was nice to kind of revisit everything living in the community. But I like it. It's a nice, close-knit community. And so it's always unique. Every area, I just love people.
Mm-hmm. Has your perspective changed? So what, when you watch this, say, before living here, and then now that you live here, is there something that you thought, boy, that's different than I thought?
I wouldn't say nothing necessarily different. I think just adjusting to every community. And so what I mean by that is just the nuances. I know that there's like a strong Italian heritage that's in the community, right? And so just being able to appreciate just the history in each area, and every area is a little bit different, right? And so from that standpoint, I think it's nice, and it's nice in living in the Midwest because you're hour or two from Cleveland, hour or two from Pittsburgh, 3 hours from Columbus, 4 to 5 hours to Washington, D.C. So you can get to major cities in relatively real time versus in Dallas. If you try to go from Dallas to El Paso, it's 10 hours one way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I feel like we're almost jumping ahead here, but we fortunately have the great problem of several employers going to be hiring thousands of roles, right? So we have Lordstown Motors setting up and doing active recruiting. We have Ultium Cells, which is the joint venture between General Motors and LG Chem. It's a current construction project. They'll be hiring at least 1,000 jobs. So what recommendations do you have to be welcoming? Because obviously we have a lot of individuals here that will benefit from, current residents that will benefit from these new employment opportunities. But do you have any suggestions on how we as a community can be more welcoming to people not from the Youngstown, Ohio area?
I think that's always a unique aspect because every family is a little bit different. For me, I'm a little bit more forward thinking from, I have my wife says a more aggressive approach, meaning that I never meet a stranger. So I can be in a grocery store or, anywhere and, build a relationship and it develops from there. And so I would say for those that are making a transition into the area, if there's a way where whether the Business Journal could really provide a database of all the different resources that's available, right? And so depending on how the family dynamics are, the needs of the family may change, right? And so if they're married, what type of things do they have? If they're married with children, without children. So if they have children, with education resources that's available, right? ISDs or school districts is important. I wouldn't necessarily get into the ranking because that's a separate conversation, but giving them private and private options also is beneficial. So just the educational resources. And when I look at education, I look at it not just pre-K through K, but I look at it before that, top-notch daycares. And then you go to pre-K to K, and then any post-secondary school. So if there's training, truck driving school, YSU, and then any technical schools or 2-year schools, and then any post-secondary resources that's available, I think is important. So that's from an educational standpoint. Housing, what housing resources? So a list of multiple different real estate brokers, I think is important. So they know, the resource that's available and any programs that may be available for them financing their homes or condos or however they want to live. And then rental resources. So if they don't want to buy, they want to rent just to get comfortable with the area. So just kind of from that standpoint. So it's just, as you see, it's just kind of looking at developing that whole community of resources, because that's, again, going back to what I had spoke about earlier, is where they're living at. And then what other resources for them. And then, of course, they're coming here for a job. And just building that relationship, any religious affiliations, just having kind of a database of that. And then, I know some communities, they would have, welcome to the community maybe every 3 months, and bringing out, a number of different resources that's available to say, hey, just welcome to the area. And this could be maybe the business. It could be maybe at a county level that every 3 months, we're just going to welcome and just say hi to everybody.
Right.
And we call it the Mahoning High event. Hi.
I like that.
But the intent is really building community, building relationships. And I repeat myself purposely because it really is about developing and building relationships. So anyone that's new in the area, they can feel comfortable just knowing that they have all these resources that's available to them. And then from there, it just expands of, hey, these are some great restaurants,
Right.
Everyone wants to eat.
Right. Well, I really like what you said. You never meet a stranger. So do you find it takes a minute or two to, so many people are guarded. Like, what technique do you use to kind of just, I'm kind of the same way. I like to jump right in and say, hey, and just really open up. And what method do you use to get people to kind of open up quickly?
The interesting thing is, I would say I'm a people watcher. I like to just watch behaviors. Mm-hmm. It's intriguing to me. And so I think I always say you have to start, look in the mirror and know yourself, right? And so once you know yourself, you can know how you're going to interact with other individuals. And so for me, I know that I'm naturally a people watcher, but it starts from the simplest conversations. And then from there, you can kind of engage and see how to develop that relationship with those individuals. And so I would say the cornerstone is knowing who you are initially, so that you know how you can interact with individuals within the local community. And so some, it takes a little bit longer, to be honest with you. For example, my loved ones, they're a little bit more reserved. So it takes them a little bit of time. And I would say anyone that's moving into the community, don't feel the pressure. It takes time. I believe there's a couple of studies that said it takes at least 3 to even 5 years to feel like you're comfortable in a community. So think about that. It takes 3 to 5 years to feel like you're comfortable. Like right now, if I asked you, Jeff, hey, what are your grocery stores? You may reel off 6 or 7 versus me. I may have to think of the grocery store and think of where it's actually located, right? Versus you can reel off, 7 of them and this is off this highway, this is off this street. So it takes a little bit of time to develop that. And so I would say to the listeners, anyone that's, moving into community, don't feel the pressure to just develop those relationships overnight. It takes time.
Right. It does. And that's really where we as a community have to be open as well, because, for years, our population has been in decline. And I just saw a stat from U-Haul that Ohio is number 4, the fourth in the rankings as far as people moving into the state of Ohio via U-Haul statistics. So take that for what it's worth. And I'm sure, there's a lot of people flowing towards Columbus and Cleveland, obviously. But the Mahoning Valley, once again, with the employment opportunities available here, I would have to imagine our proximity to interstate highways and you mentioned from a sports standpoint, you have your pick of teams, right? Cleveland or Pittsburgh. Did you have a favorite the other night? Or are you Cowboys?
Actually, interesting thing, I don't have a team. I know everyone says, growing up in Texas, you're supposed to be the Cowboys or, Houston Texans, but I'm a storyline guy. And so it was interesting, seeing Cleveland back in the playoffs. It was actually, it's nice. I grew up with, Cleveland Browns always being, in the playoffs and, being kind of a tough outing for anyone. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Pittsburgh. And so I'm not necessarily surprised because I always say in postseason, it's a new season. And so you really don't know what's going to happen. So it was actually quite interesting. And then, listening to local news and radio with Pittsburgh, it was just interesting because they started off strong and then kind of folded at the end versus Cleveland kind of fluttered a little bit and then just really blossomed at the right time. So it's actually, like I said, I love the storylines in sports because to me, sports, it imitates life. It really does. And so sometimes you look at Pittsburgh, you can start off with a bang and then just kind of you have some struggles at the end. Versus Cleveland is doing the right thing. They're actually blossoming at the right time when you really want to be playing your best, the best football that you can.
Well, we won't mention the fact that we're recording this on Tuesday, the 12th, and the Ohio State Alabama game was last night, and I made it through the half. That was it.
Yeah, that was tough. It was good though to see actually, Big Ten back in the championship. I know the SEC always kind of gets that the credentials, and a lot of times get 2 teams in the Final Four. So it was nice to see another team actually in the final the championship game.
Right. So on the theme of sports, and you mentioned, you were actively involved in sports and have a love for basketball. Was there a favorite, when you were looking up to people as you were growing up, were there sports figures you looked up to, or business leaders, or who were your leaders that you looked up to when you were younger?
I would say from a business. I mean, I'll start more so than from a sports. Is locally in Dallas, we had a lot of guys that was in the area. So I don't know if you remember Larry Johnson, Grandmama. He played at UNLV. He's from Dallas, Texas, and so Spud Webb from Dallas, Texas, and so the interesting thing is I actually had an opportunity to work out with those guys when I was younger, and I was much younger than them. So you just developed those relationships. And so you saw the success that Larry Johnson initially had. I know he had some injuries at the end. And I was fortunate, I'll be honest with you. I didn't realize I played with a few guys that played in the NBA. And, when you're younger, you don't think about it until someone said, you really played with a lot of individuals. Tony Battie, he played in the NBA. Kenyon Martin was actually number one. He played in Cincinnati. We was on the same traveling team. And so just not necessarily looking up, but you just realize that with hard work, you can actually get some of the results that you want. So, and I had an opportunity to actually work out or play with a lot of the Dallas Mavericks. So Jamal Mashburn, Jason Kidd, Jim Jackson, because he played at Ohio State also. And so that was in the Dallas area. And then Mark Aguirre, I'm dating myself a little bit. And so Mark Aguirre used to work out in Dallas because he, played in Dallas and eventually transitioned into Detroit. So I wouldn't say necessarily just looked up. I always call it a gumbo. I try to mirror some of the things that they all did to see how I can incorporate that from my perspective. And from a business standpoint, the same thing. It started locally with my father and my mother owning, small businesses, and then also the church. And then from there, I would just say, like Martin Luther King, he actually owned quite a few businesses, and just really understanding how to serve your community. And I talk a lot about community because any product that you have, whether it's a smartphone, iPhone, or something, it's a product, right? How does this product or service support the community? And so, and then from there, I would say it's a lot of different business leaders that I've learned something from, whether it's the CEOs that's over Fortune 500 companies to your small donut shop owner that, just need to understand how to pay their bills. And so to me, I always learn something from every business owner. And for me, I think it's always important. I always want to learn and grow. And that it's one individual. I think it's a multitude of individuals that I've learned from and benefited.
So, and you have your leadership style and philosophy seems like it's an accumulation of different experiences over time, a sports element, a business element. And, what type of leadership style do you have? So in your day-to-day work with your colleagues and your peers, and, you had to come and you've moved around. So that's interesting. When you're coming into a new community, what leadership style do you use to kind of drive engagement?
Yeah, I think and to be honest with you, when it's all said and done, it boils into one simple phrase, and I call it servant leadership. The reason I say servant leadership is that I always say, I put myself in someone else's shoes, and I think that's always important. And so, and if you take that approach, you typically can benefit anyone, regardless of where you're going. You want to understand their dynamics, their pain points, the challenges, but then help them be engaged of how do we move together and move forward. And so when you look at it from a servant perspective, it doesn't mean that there's not accountability and responsibility. It heightens that relationships. But when I think of servant leadership, I really think of being able to really engage the team so that we can move in the right direction. And so it's not just sports analogies. And even, today we care for cancer patients. Well, I'll say cancer and hematology patients. So how do we do it better? How can we serve our patients? How can we also serve each other? And so when you take that approach, I believe it's actually transparent in multiple different ways.
No, I agree. Servant leadership has come up several times on the podcast, and it actually requires a degree of vulnerability where, I've heard it called, you flip the org chart, right? So the leader is there to serve the individuals that they work with, all the stakeholders, right? The patients, the customers, the colleagues, the direct reports. So what's your thoughts on that degree of vulnerability required to let people know like you're here for them versus they're here for you?
Yeah, to be honest with you, that is one of the biggest challenges, right? And so, and I've experienced that when you move into a different community, you're completely vulnerable. You don't have the safety net oftentimes of your community. You have to develop relationships, and unfortunately, some will work, and the good thing is some will work. But to me, I think the other thing is that when you're also vulnerable, it to me opens up the avenue to develop that trust.
Right.
And when you trust each other, you can get more done. And so you can accomplish bigger goals from that standpoint. And so for me, it's always, how do we think not where we're at right now, but where do we see ourselves in the future? And when you're looking at it from a we approach, then it takes time to develop those relationships to be able to get the organization moving in that direction. So vulnerability is definitely part of servant leadership. It's actually a huge part.
Right. So speaking of that, I want to jump into, obviously we all have made leadership mistakes in our time. But before we do that, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors.
The Brain Gain is a collaborative effort, and we'd like to thank the headlining members of the coalition, including Farmers National Bank, Sweeney Chevrolet Buick GMC, and the Mahoning Valley Manufacturers Coalition. Also included are Eastern Gateway Community College, PNC Bank, the Youngstown Business Incubator, Youngstown State University, the DeBartolo Corporation, Simon Roofing, and the Mahoning County Career and Technical Center.
And we're back. And so this was interesting, this thread of vulnerability in servant leadership leads to trust and trusting relationships. So have you had any leadership mistakes over time? Something you care to share with us, how you've learned from any mistakes that you've made?
Oh, yeah. I think that's the great thing about life is hopefully you do learn from your mistakes. And I would say some of the biggest ones is going back to that vulnerability is, to be honest with you, failing and being as vulnerable as I needed to be to develop trust with colleagues. It takes time. And what I mean by that is that it's not just time, but it's also really how do I engage the individuals that I'm working with for a common goal. And oftentimes, there's a lot of images, there's a lot of illustrations that's available where you look at like communication and you look at messaging, and you have the messenger, you have the message, and then you have the listener, and it's breakdown somewhere in there, right? And so I failed in some of those areas. And so the important thing is that being able to learn and be accountable, and it starts with me, and that's always key in not making any excuses, but learning from it, growing from it. And then developing those core skill sets to be able to grow. And when you say, how do you develop those core skill sets? It's being able to be honest with yourself and say, okay, is there trainings that's available? Do I have a mentor that I can reach out to? Do I have mentors? Do I have colleagues that's in the similar position that they can provide some resources? And so when you start looking at, again, going to different communities, it can be your mentor, sometimes it can be your alumni at your universities or trade schools. To this day, I still have relationships with my professors in undergrad because it's just building that community that I feel that I can reach out to be able to grow and learn. And then I have mentors that just in the community that saw me grow up. And so all these different resources are available to be able to help when mistakes will happen. And for the listeners, there will be mistakes that will happen. But it's important. How do you learn and how do you grow from those mistakes?
Right. And are you a Jocko Willink fan by any chance? The Navy SEAL.
Yep. Yeah, I am.
Yeah, he wrote the book Extreme Ownership, and that's something that I like what you said. Take ownership or take a self inventory, because oftentimes that's what the spirit of that book was. Is okay, what was my role? And yes, there are lots of external factors and things beyond our control, but that's interesting, that notion of taking the self-inventory and talking about what was your role in the process, and then how do you just continue to evolve.
Yep.
Mentorship programs. I mean, you mentioned mentorship programs. That's a huge part of where our community is going forward. And in many cases, it's mentorship, it's apprenticeship, and it's pre-apprenticeship programs. It's getting kids aspired into career paths, and those paths range from, career tech to trades to college to the military. So, were mentorship programs important in your early age in your development?
Oh, vital. That was important. So if you notice in this conversation, I've talked a lot about my family because that's where it started, right? That was my local community. And when I say family, I was fortunate to have a mother and father. They had a great relationship, married for, 40 plus years. But there's different communities. And so it's important to make sure that you can expose the next generation as early as possible to opportunities, plural, right?
Mm-hmm.
The reason I say that is that, for example, I got an undergrad in finance and of course, an MBA, but I am not your traditional finance individual, right? Nowhere near it. And so, right. And it's important because I learned that at a young age from a mentor. So I would say I had it locally from my family, uncles. They served in the Air Force. So they knew from the beginning, as soon as they graduated high school, they were going to transition to military service. Through those military services, they can get trades and education. And so that's how they transition. Others within the local community were small business owners. And so being able to spend those summers in it was a small community in Waco, Texas, actually, where I had an opportunity to just do, volunteer work. And so just being able to see the day in, day out, helped me understand the importance of just work, great work ethic. And so being able to have that experience, it just taught me a lot. And so I think it's important with mentors. Exposure is key, and exposing the next generation of future leaders to opportunities is always important. That's why I'm big on, like for here, we've talked about how do we develop the resources to grow a community. Well, it's the same thing for the next generation. So it shouldn't wait till they're in high school to consider certain, opportunities. At a young age, they should look into arts and entertainment. They should look into math and engineering. They should make reading. And the library is a great resource. Oftentimes, books get collected dust, but that's where your mind can really grow. And so being able to expose them at a young age is important. Oftentimes, I think we fail is we wait until they're into high school and then say, hey, I think, you're good at math. You should be an accountant. Hey, you're good in, art. You should be a graphic designer. Well, can you combine the two? Maybe you can be an entrepreneur that does graphic designing. And so I think it's important is if we can expose the next generations at a young age, then it opens up the avenues and the opportunities for them.
Do you feel like it's funny you mentioned, we talked about resources earlier, and if you're new to a community, where do I go to do X and Y and Z and just what's available? Do you feel like you have a good sense of the mentorship programs available here in the community to help our youth?
I think that's the challenge. Now, to be honest with you, that's a challenge for us, but we know I always say we have tentacles. My wife is in education. And so she's been in education, K-12, most of her career, and now she's in university. But the reason I say that is that we're actually fortunate because she knows how to reach out to identify those resources through your local school districts. I talk about the library also because we do go to the libraries when it was open. I know it's COVID-19, but when they were open to be able to identify those resources that's available from an educational standpoint. But I think it's a challenge. But I would say not just in this local community, that's a challenge that I've seen in multiple different states of where the resources that's available to the next generation. And so that's definitely a challenge. But this is not the only community that experiences that.
Right. It has me thinking because we're launching a navigators program as part of the Brain Gain initiative. And that literally is to become a champion for mentorship programs and expose great programs that are happening and then inspire others to stand up their own mentorship programs. And really, because once again, as you've mentioned, it's setting, just working with our students to help them on a path to career fulfillment or personal fulfillment or whatever the case may be. There's a lot of opportunities for mentorship.
So Jeff, if I can take it even one step further, I mean, the thing is from this, I think is one thing having a great conversation, but I always say, or I've always heard, what are we going to do about it? And so, I mean, for those that's listening on the podcast or others, there may be an opportunity, and I don't mind. I think I get the board or the shareholders here, is that if there's a group of, of young, up and coming, future generational leaders, in the Hope Center for Cancer Care, we could do a summer mentor program where they can come and spend time at our facilities and be able to learn about hematology, oncology. And from there, it opens up a lot of different positions. So one, you got the business side, that's me, executive director, but then you have the physicians, you have nurse practitioners, you have nurses, we have medical assistants, so we have clinician side and the admin side. And this is not a promoting of the Hope Center for Cancer Care, but if not only for the Hope Center, but if there's other community organizations that in that same summer, or I shouldn't say summer, period of time, that we get mentors to come in and be able to spend time at those locations, give them the visibility that they need. This helps plant the seed to help them start to be successful and for their futures. And so I'm definitely supportive of a program like that if other organizations are willing to participate also.
Well, it's funny. You've already answered the challenge question, and I believe you will find one of the goals we're going to have here. One of the outcomes, right? What should we do about it? Is I think you and I have to work on getting a mentorship program, stood up and getting people exposed to your organization and yourself. So that's a challenge I'm going to set for myself to make sure it happens. So we actually are making an impact for sure. But I guess to close out, that is a great challenge to offer to the audience. How do you actively drive it, set up or drive or participate in mentorship programs? Do you have any other challenges or things you want to offer to the community before we close up here for today?
Yeah, I would say to the listening audience, I really enjoy the community. From someone that has moved around, I love the people that's here. For anyone that's going to be moving into the community, it's a great community to be a part of. And it's an honor to be in the community. And so, however I can be of any service, Jeff has my contact information, and you don't ever have to hesitate to reach out to me.
Well, Rhonte, thanks so much for your time today. We really enjoyed having you on the Brain Gain podcast.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for the opportunity.
Thank you for joining us today. We really do appreciate your time. If you like what you hear, please share it with a friend. And also, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast player. Those really do help us improve the quality of the show. If you have questions, comments, concerns, ideas, guests you want to recommend, hit me up on LinkedIn or send me an email at jhermann@business-journal.com. I will certainly get back to you. And I do have to thank, once again, the members of our Brain Gain Coalition. Without them, none of this would be possible. So thank you to Farmers National Bank, Sweeney Chevrolet Buick GMC, the Mahoning Valley Manufacturers Coalition for all of their support. And along with them, additional members of the coalition include Eastern Gateway Community College, PNC Bank, the Youngstown Business Incubator, MCCTC, Mahoning County Career and Technical Center, the great team out there, Simon Roofing, the DeBartolo Corporation, and Youngstown State University. So thanks so much once again, and we will see you next time.
I'm brave. I got what it takes. I am a warrior.
Thanks for watching the video. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that little bell for notifications. And also make sure to connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. For all of your business news, visit businessjournaldaily.com. For all of your arts and entertainment news, go to afterhoursyoungstown.com.